Trains like these used to run all through the north of Ireland. Today's programme is all about these trains and the people who worked and travelled on them. Our story starts almost 150 years ago when the first railways were being built. The railway builders had a problem: to work out ways and means of getting money.
What you did if you wanted to set yourself up in the railway business was form a company. Shares in the company were then sold to whoever would buy them. The shareholders then just had to sit back and wait. If the railway company was a success, then they knew they would make more money. If it wasn't, then they stood to lose all. No one really knew if the railways were going to make them rich or if their money was just going to go up in smoke. Even so, many were willing to risk their savings in the gamble. And soon, new railways were beginning to appear all over the north of Ireland.
The first trains ran from Belfast to Armagh on the Ulster Railway. Passengers paid 1 shilling for the privilege of travelling first class. Those with less money to spend made the journey in an open carriage at a cost of only 6pence. While the first railways were a great success, there were still many obstacles to be overcome. In some places, giant viaducts were built. The pillars had to be strong enough to support the weight of heavily laden trains. There were places where great stone bridges had to be built. They carried the railway tracks high above roadways. The railway builders were also faced with high, rocky hills. To let the trains run past, they had to cut and tunnel their way through solid rock. Where the railways ran along the coast, steep-sided embankments were built. If they weren't strong enough, waves would wash them away. Sometimes the material taken from cuttings was used to build up these embankments. While the railways were making great strides forward, there were still other problems to be faced.
5 feet 6 inches. Add the two together and we get 10 feet 6 inches. Divide by 2 and we get 5 feet 3 inches.
The main problem was one of width or gauge. Each different company owned its own tracks. These varied by as much as 1.5 feet in width. This meant that trains could only run on the track of any one company. Now, the Board of Trade wanted every railway in the country to be linked together on track of a standard gauge. Major General Palsy of the Royal Engineers was called in to investigate. He listened to proposals that the tracks be either 5 feet or 5 feet 6 inches wide. Then he made his decision that the average between these two figures be adopted. The Irish standard gauge has remained at 5 feet 3 inches ever since.
Before long, there were railways running all over the country. Almost everywhere from Scarva to Stranorlar and from Cavan to Carnalee had its own railway station. Thousands of new jobs were created in small country stations. One of the most important was that of signalmen.
You having a good time? Well, 5 past. Oh, that'll do the best then. Okay, you got it.
Signalmen made sure that trains run on the right sections of track. Each lever is connected to a signal. If they don't do their jobs properly, trains could crash.
That'll do the best, right though. There.
In some stations, lots of trains passed through every day. In others, the pace was much slower. In those stations, the station master could only half expect the train to arrive, if it arrived at all.
"10:30 and it still hasn't arrived. They must all be asleep." In those days, if you worked for the railways, you knew you were in a good job. You were better paid than the man breaking his back working out in the fields, and you didn't have to put up with the drudgery of looking after a machine from dawn to dusk in a factory. And with maybe only 10 trains a day, there was plenty of time to sit back and watch the world go by. And get up to a spot of mischief too. Some railwaymen near Drogheda kept dogs, and were known to spend their free time poaching Lord Gormanston's estate. Then there was the case of the 2 station masters with a passion for horses. One day they went absent to visit the local racetrack. The long arm of the railway company soon caught up with them, and they were reprimanded for leaving their station without permission and proceeding by train to the races without paying their fares, and afterwards giving false statements as to the cause of their absence. The company directors must have been racing men too. The station masters didn't lose their jobs.
After a run at full speed, steam trains had to be brought back to the shunting yards. In the yards, men worked hard getting the engines ready for another run. Boilers were filled up with water and tenders restocked with coal. You could see all sorts of people working round the engine sheds. Boilermakers, fitters, turners and fire droppers. All of them had important jobs to do, but none as important as the men who actually drove the trains, the fireman and engine driver.
The fireman and engine driver had to work together as a team. It was no easy job driving a steam train. They could weigh over 400 tons and run at speeds of up to 80 miles per hour. The fireman had to be strong, well able to shovel tons of coal, maybe as many as 5 tons on a run from Belfast to Dublin, and that 5 tons in 2.5 hours. A fireman had to work for many years before becoming an engine driver. When you got that job, you really knew you were at the top of your trade.
If the railways meant hard work for some, for others they meant pleasure, for those with a mind to go on a day trip.
The excursion to Bangor, please.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
70 years ago, day excursions were all the rage. If you wanted to get away from the dreary world of work, you paid your money over to the railway company. For the price of your fare, they would carry you away to somewhere much more pleasant. Somewhere like Bangor or Bundoran. You could spend the day as you pleased, taking in the sea air or watching the pretty girls go by. You could also partake of the play.
At their height, the railways had no rivals. Thousands of passengers were carried every year. Each company took great pride in giving good service. The railways soon had to face the challenge of motor traffic. More and more goods were being carried by lorry. Passengers also were starting to turn to buses and cars. The railways were badly affected, but they soon hit back.
The railways were quick to take up the challenge presented by road transport. Extra trains ran every weekday, carrying people to and from work. Then, every Saturday and Sunday, there were special services. Trains like the Portrush Flyer and the North Atlantic Express ran at record speeds. Another fast train ran from Belfast to Newcastle. It was called the Golfers Express. It was everything the keen golfer could ask for. In just over an hour, you could be out on the course, ready to play. Then, time to play all day, and still get back home in time for tea.
Improved services weren't enough to save the steam trains. All over the country, lines were being closed. With the engines silent, station after station was abandoned and left empty. After the closures, only the main lines were left in service. Diesel trains took over the work of the steam trains. Every day they carry people to and from work. The last steam trains saw out their days hauling stones and rubble to the site of a new motorway. With the motorway built, cars roar past the railway sidings in their thousands. With so much ground lost, it seemed that the railways were finished forever. They had proved more resilient. A new station has been built in the centre of Belfast. From Belfast Central, passengers can travel to Bangor, Londonderry and Dublin. In time, it is planned that all the railway tracks in Northern Ireland will meet here.
40 pence, please. Thank you.
4 Bangor, West Bangor. 4.
The pride of the new service is the Enterprise Express. It runs south to Dublin. With everyone safely aboard, the fastest train in the country today is ready to go.